from the Gemara in Menachos, the Babli in Menachos Adaf Mem Gimel. Tanya, Hay Rabbi Meir Omer, Ma nishtana tchelas mikol minei tzivonim. What is unique about tchelas that it was chosen to be the color on tzitzit? There's a thread of tchelet that is woven into or tied amongst the strings of the tzitzit. Because the tchelas is like the sea, right? It's the color of the sea. The yam doma l'rakia, and in turn, the sea is like the heavens. V'rakia l'kisei hakavod, and the heavens are akin to the kisei hakavod. Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk in Shemos Perek Chav Daled, b'tachas raglav k'maaseh livnas hasapir, that the image of the divine throne was like the sapphire, the stone of sapphire, or more accurately, the brick of sapphire, and like the clear sky. So the image of the divine throne, the prophetic image of the divine throne, is akin to the experience of the clear blue sky. That's a pasuk from Yechezkel Perek Aleph, that he saw the throne and it was like a sapphire stone. So here's the question. Why does the Midrash need to say this whole line of associations? That why is Techeles so unique? Because Techeles is like this, which is like this, which is like this, and that thing is like the Kisei HaKavod, like the throne of glory. Presumably, what we're trying to get to is the throne of glory. That's the thing that it's trying to. That's the theme that we're trying to get to, that of spiritual significance. So, what is this whole series of associations of? Well, the Techeles is like the sea, and the sea is like the firmament, and the firmament is like the Kisei HaKavod. Or you can add a bunch of other things into that line. Like I have my niece's bath toy is also blue, and so I think of the bath toy, and I'll think like, why do you have to think like there's this whole long association of things that happen to be blue that will bring us back to the Kisei HaKavod? They're all different blues. Okay, they're possibly slightly different hues of blue. You're saying, yes? Okay, is this an attempt to answer the question, or? No. Oh, okay. No, you're just pointing out the different hues of blue. Okay, yes, that's true. No, but you understand. Like the question is clear. If the goal is to get to is to remind us of the throne of glory, which is a question in and of itself. What's the significance of the throne of glory and the tzitzit? But if the point is to get us to that association, then why is that we have to have a string of other associations in the middle? That's the question. So
there's some histories about the sea and the heavens. There's things I can relate to. I can see them. I can't see that. So if you tell me like that,
so that slightly line of reasoning. I heard a story many years ago from in the name of Ramosha Shapiro Zatzal, that someone asked for his teacher of Dessler on this particular midrash, like why is it that we have to have this string of associations? So he asked him in a slightly facetious manner. He said, there's a law that a man is not supposed to stare at the clothing of a woman that he knows. Meaning, even if the woman is not in the clothing, just clothing that's lying. Right, that's brought in the Gemara. Because by staring at the clothing, he'll associate the woman with the clothing. So can you relate to that halacha? He says, of course I can relate to that. That's understandable. He says, well, it depends where your mind is in association with. Meaning, if you have associations in your mind of this reminds me of that there are certain associations that are automatic. But there are other associations that a person can train their mind to make those links together. It's kind of similar. This is a bit of a tangent. I don't want to really get into that, but this is really what's going on in the simanim of Rosh Hashanah. The simanim, the foods that are eaten on Rosh Hashanah night, that it's seemingly there's a series of word games. Like this sounds like that, or the Rimon is very full, so we should also be full. The purpose of that is it is a ritual to train one's mind to associate certain things of spiritual or moral significance with the things that you interact with in the world. That's the point of that whole ritual. So similarly, what this Gemara is trying to say is that it's possible to interact with the world in which a person is making the links and associations to things that are the spiritual source of that thing, and to understand the moral or spiritual significance behind those things. And this is the idea behind the letter Taf, which Taf means something, as we've gone through all the letters in the alphabet. All the letters in the alphabet, they mean a thing. And a tav means a mark. That's what it means. V'hitviza tav al rosham, as we're going to read from the pasuk in Yechezkel in a moment. A tav means like a stamp. A stamp. Right. So with that, we can jump into the text of Rav Kook himself. We'll get to the pasuk in a minute. So Rav Kook says the following: Harishum achitzoni, the external markings, noveahu min hatzura hapnimit. It is a pouring out or an outward expression of the internal form. So the external rishum, the external superficial, is an expression of the inner surah, of the inner form. Min hamahut hamugbelet hamekabelet et or chayeha, the internal essence, which is contained within and receives the light which sustains it. Emdata b'haviyata, its station and its being. Min hamahut harechava, it in turn receives from the essence which is not constricted, but is rather wide and expansive. Hachofshit, which is free. Hamaromema, which is uplifting. Berum idealuta, in the loftiness of its ideal of its idealness, not idealism, but its idealness, meaning its ideal state. So the external constricted expression of the thing is meant to be a flowing or right in organic expression of the internal. Hadraga yoter mu'uchara, the gradation which is furthest in the order of progress, or to put that another way, we've gone from Aleph to Taf. We've gone through the whole progress at the beginning of the sequence to the end of the sequence. So the end of the sequence, hanismechet al klalut kol hakochot, which is supported by the gathering together of all the different forces, hanosim hatziyurim hamidgalim, which carries all of the tziyurim, all of the forms. Again, Kook refers to the letters as forms. He osa tatav. That is the thing that creates the tav, the mark, the final mark, et harishum achitzoni, the external form, or the external stamp. Shelifamim mitgalebo kol hachayil v'achosen, and says Rav Kook, there are two versions of this tav, of the external stamp. What are the two possible forms? The two possible forms of the letter tav itself. There's a tav rafa, a soft tav without, which is traditionally written without a dot, pronounced slightly different than the tav. Right? Either pronounced in some dialects, it's pronounced as an S sound. In other dialects, it's pronounced as a th, like a th. It could be the soft tav. V'lifamim mitrayahu rak b'teiro achitzoni b'rishamav haboltim milavar. V'lifamim dagushu maleh. Sometimes it's full. It has a full sound. V'lifamim rafa v'chaser. And sometimes it's soft and lacking. We'll get back to that point in a minute. That the fact that the tav it oscillates back and forth between its soft and lacking form to its more full form. The tav in its progression carries within it all of the forms. And it is not lacking anything. The lowest level is like the highest. It becomes wide in its end. And it has a crookedness in its final form on its left side. So what is that referring to? It's referring to the left leg of the tav, which becomes not straight, but it becomes crooked toward the left. It becomes bent, so to speak. This is a pictorial expression of the expressions of life. Mikar siguvam, from their high loftiness, holchim heim umit akmim. They become more and more crooked. They become perverted from their ideal form. As they become lower and lower in their expression, they become less and less ideal. V'sof hakol liot chozer l'marom hayosher. However, all will eventually go back to their high state of straightness and perfection. Hakoshet v'haor, their luminous state. Hakodesh v'atov, the holy and good. Liot mivaleit et hachotem hanitzchi, in order to stick out. Like mivaleit means to be bolate, right? To protrude outward. Et hachotem hanitzchi, the eternal sign. Et haemet, the truth, right? That's alluding to the Gemara in Shabbat that says that the chotam, the stamp of God, is emet. Emet here being in the sense of ideal. That's in fact what the word in Lashon HaKodesh emet means. Like the word emet in Hebrew means ideal. It doesn't mean true in the scientific way that we use the word true in English. It means ideal. Like Eliezer says to Lavan and his family, Im tasu iti chesed ve'emet, if you will do for me kindness and emet. How could you do truth for someone? Truth is not something that you do, but if you understand that emet is the ideal, right? So you could do the ideal thing for someone. So anyway, that's I say that parenthetically. So,
I'd asked you last week about that issue when emet gets thrown to the ground. Does that fit in with
yeah.
this, that it wasn't truth that was thrown to the ground?
Emet. So again, emet in Lashon HaKodesh means the ideal. That's what it means. Ideal. So the notion of emet, how so just to give everyone here the background. So you're always referring to the Midrash Rabbah that says that when man was created, so God consulted with all the different attributes to see if they agreed to God creating man. So there's a whole discussion. Different some attributes said yes, some attributes said not. So emet was one of the attributes that was against. It was against the creation of man, because man is malay sheker, because man is full of lies. So how can it be that man will be created as full of lies? He is in opposite, and that's alluded to in the pasuk in Tehillim, where emes me'eretz tismach, that the truth will sprout from the earth. So what that means is, this is the summarized version of the conversation that Yoni and I were having. What that means is that there is no such thing as the ideal, in that, because if the ideal can only exist in the abstract. The ideal exists in the abstract. Once you start building things, once you start making things happen in the real world, so things look differently than they do in the ideal. That's what Rav Kook is saying over here. They become more and more crooked. As things begin to take concrete shape, they diverge from the ideal. That's the nature of reality. The nature of reality is that you have an idea in your head, you want to create something, you want to build something, you want to manifest something, so the way that it ends up looking does not exactly cohere with the original plan. However, the chiddush of what Rav Kook is saying is that really, when you get down to the final rung of application, and you say to yourself, "Oh my God, this is totally not what I had in mind." But if with any luck, if a person has oriented themselves properly in the process, even though the end step doesn't mirror the ideal that you had originally, you realize at the end, this is acting. So the process is a holecho mitakem, becomes more and more crooked, more and more perverse, perhaps, that's a strong word, but it becomes more, it diverges more and more and more from the ideal, to the point where you think this is total, that bears no resemblance whatsoever to what I had in mind. But at the very end, it shoots back up, so to speak, in the sense that it expresses the ideal in a way that it's even stronger than what you had in mind. And he's explaining how that he's gonna explain at the end. He's gonna allude to some Ma'amari Chazal that are examples of this, and we're gonna hash that out. So stay tuned for the next couple of lines. V'kan ba ha'avaya letafkidah ha'mif'ali hayetzirati. The creation comes to its fulfillment. Hamifali, in the sense of acting out, hayetzirati, in the sense of its creativity, lecholel olmei olamim, to create all of the series of worlds, b'mored la'ein tachlit, in its full, like la'ein tachlit means in its infinitude. Hadalet she'itchilat ha'agbala. Okay, so before we read this line, just to give a brief introduction, according to Rav Kook, the proper way of writing the letter tav is with two dalids. How is it two dalids? You have the big dalid, which is on the right side, and on the left side, the left leg of the dalid is supposed to be an upside down dalid. According to Rav Kook, that's the proper way of writing the tav. So a tav is like a big dalid, and inside is a little dalid. So hadalet she'itchilat ha'agbala mereshit ha'itzairut. The Dalid, it represents the Hagbala, the constriction in the beginning of anything taking form. If we remember all the way back in Os Dalid, we're now all at the end. This is the fourth letter. So we talked about how the Dalid has a double connotation. Dal, like poor, poverty, in the sense of constriction, and it also has the connotation of the door. And the punchline, so to speak, was that the aspect of constriction is something that's moving you towards the door. And the most basic experience, that's kind of like an experience of pain, right? Why does a person experience pain, right? Even physical pain, it's in order to point to the direction of what needs to be done, right? Pain is information. Pain is information. So the constriction, in also in a physiological sense, but also in a conceptual and a spiritual and idealistic sense, the constriction is pushing the person towards the proper aim. So that's the Dalid. This is alluded to also in the Os Tav of the Dalid within a Dalid, the big Dalid, and inside is a small Dalid. So I'll begin the sentence again. Hadalid she'tchilat ha'agbala merishit ha'yitzarut. The Dalid, which represents the constriction in the beginning of any progress, in the beginning of any process. Po, here it comes. Lachtom yitzirata bi'idgalut kocha, in order to reveal at the end of the process its full strength. V'chotem malei hitvita la b'tochnat hatav, and it comes to bring its stamp in the manner of the tav. Dalid b'toch dalid, one dalid inside another dalid. Katan b'toch gadol, small one and a big one. Rishum gbal, the rishum. We have to think of a good translation for rishum. The formation, perhaps the form which is constricted, b'toch rishum igvuli, inside a form which is not constricted. And that's a huge sod right there. And that's I mean, it's not the punchline, but getting close to the punchline. Saying the idea of the constriction that is experienced throughout a process. That you have the ideal in your mind, you have the motivation, the inspiration, you have it's the ideal in the world of the abstract, and then it starts to take form in the real world, and then the constriction sets in. The dalit, the poverty sinks in. Because things aren't ideal. Things are smaller than what they're supposed to be. Things don't work out as planned. So they become more and more constriction, and the constriction stays with the entire process. And now that we're at the end of the process, i.e. the last letter of the alphabet, we find out that really that constriction was leading you to the absolute ideal that you couldn't have imagined to begin with. Meaning you had this ideal in your mind and you're so disappointed throughout the whole process that it's not working out like you had imagined, and then you realize this version is actually better than what I had in mind. Right? It's the big Dalid. The big Dalid inside the little Dalid. You realize the whole time that constriction, that Dalid constriction, was leading you towards the ideal that you couldn't even thought of. The Chol HaHona Atzum, and all this tremendous richness, Shel Osher HaKochot VaHachayim, of all the richness of the forces of life, Bekotno Begadlo, and its smallness and its bigness. Again, the smallness felt is the feeling of being constricted by the reality of the world, trying to put something into concrete application. It feels small, it feels constricted. The gadlo, and the bigness, realizing how that very constriction was leading you to the very, very best possibility. Ya'aleh lahachtiviyut hameromama. Chativiyut, chotev, means to make a mark. So it's making a mark of greatness. Hachozeret limromea, that can go back to its supernal greatness. Again, that the manifested thing, which was experiencing more and more heaviness of constriction, is able to go back to its lofty ideal. Hamushkafa mimakor kol hatov, which spreads out from the source of all good. V'chozer harishum mimakor ha'achdut ha'alfit. And this is basically another way of saying this. It goes back to its source of alephness, ha'alfit, alephness, be'etanut havayata, in its strength of being, beshuva el beit meroma, going back to its house, right? Going back to its home, going back home. Leman tuchal od larutz arucha, in order so that it can go out again, laharbot tavei chayim, to start the process over again, in order to give more marks. Hamachzirim liyasod hachayim gam et tavei hamavet v'hachilyon, in order to undo the tav of death, which we'll get to in a moment. What he's talking about, the mark of death. That's the pasuk in Yechezkel that we're going to get to. Umaginei hazav b'redatam liyot maginei nechoshet, and the shields of bronze become shields of gold. We're going to get to that pasuk in Yeshayahu. That's a reference to a pasuk in Yeshayahu. Tachat hanachoshet avi zahav. The context of that pasuk is that Yeshayahu is consoling the people that they were being taxed to death by their Assyrian overlords, and they would take the taxes in the form of copper, like copper coins. So Yeshayahu says, "Don't worry, they're taking away the copper. I'm going to bring it back in gold." Right? They're taking away the copper. I'm going to bring it back in gold. So this is experiencing this loss of output that just gets lost, and then that output doesn't only come back. That initial investment doesn't only come back, but it comes back in an exponentialized form. Right? The investment in copper becomes gold. Yisaum el ta haratzim. What is ta haratzim? So ta haratzim is a reference to the pasuk in Malachim, which is talking about the ratzim. This is the runners of the king. Like if the king had a message that he wanted to send out, he would. Right, there was no telegram back then. There was no WhatsApp. So you had to send people to run out with the message. So these people would run very, very fast, and then they would come back and they had a place where they hung out and they waited to receive a message. So ta is spelled tough aleph. What's tough aleph? Tough aleph is the backwards order. It's not aleph to tough, but tough to aleph, right? Alluding to that once the end of the process is achieved, there is an immediate throwback to the beginning of the process, communing back to the original ideal that began the process itself. V'achayot ratzov vashov k'mara bazak. That's from the first chapter of Yechezkel. That the supernal beasts in this divine, it's not clear what to call it, this divine construct that's influencing the whole flow of reality. One of the elements of this is that there are these celestial beasts that they are ratzov vashov. They run out and they immediately return. K'mara bazak. It's as if you're seeing a flash of lightning, like the lightning goes out and immediately recedes. So similarly, the process, it comes to an end, it comes to the tav, and then he immediately goes back to the aleph, meaning the end of the process is able to immediately reflect the ideal of the beginning of the process. Yirat Hashem Mekor Chaim, the fear, this is alluded to in the pasuk in Tehillim, that the fear of God is the source of life. The fear of God is the source of life. Es Hashem Elokecha Tira, this is referring to a drasha in Baba Kama. We'll read all these inside, I promise you. We won't leave these to in the state of just pure hints like Rav Kook is doing. As Hashem Elokecha Tira, that's what the pasuk says. L'rabos talmidei chachamim. This comes to allude to Torah scholars. Okay, so all these references that Rav Kook is making over here are all examples of this dynamic. And again, we're going to get to the specific examples in a moment. But what is this fundamental dynamic? That there is an ideal that begins the generation of a process. And once you begin the process, the dalut, the constriction, the poverty of reality sets in, and you feel the weightiness and the heaviness of the world, and things are limiting, and things are, right, you're being boxed in. And then at the very, very end of the process, which is holechu mitakem, it becomes more and more perverse, more and more distant from the ideal. So it's able to immediately jump back to its ideal, because you see that that this final step is an even better expression of that ideal than you originally thought. So that's like
guaranteed something that had a positive purpose, like everything, or even bad stuff. Someone wants to do something bad, and it doesn't go as badly as they want.
So I think you're talking about how the element of kavana fits in with this whole thing. So I would say that this is, I think that it's just a built-in assumption. This is talking about someone who the kavana is a positive kavana, right? As the Gemara in Mako says, right? So someone who, right, is attempting to do negative things. So post-chumlo, they open the door, they let him do bad things. God is not going to stop someone from doing bad things. That's the whole nature of free will, right? Right? Someone who wants to purify themselves, so they give that person assistance also. A person comes with a genuine, authentic desire to do good, so he's helped along by God in order to do that positive thing. So I think that's just it should be taken for granted. This is talking about someone who is orienting themselves to good, right? Their intention is a good thing. In the ultimate sense, this is expressed in the cosmic redemption, right? The cosmic redemption is that things are holechu mitakem, they become more and more perverse, more and more distant from the ideal, and then there's this experience of seeing how actually this expresses the ideal better than we could ever have imagined. So I just want to unpack these examples over here because I think that they are very powerful. We already read the Gemara in Menachos. The Es Hashem Elokecha Tira, which Rav Kook is referring to, is brought in the Gemara Baba Kama on Daf Mem Aleph. The Gemara tells a very interesting story about two Chachamim. One Chacham was named Shimon Ha'amsoni. So Hayadorish Kol Esen Shabbatorah. Every S in the Torah, every time it said the word S, which is a word that doesn't really have a good English translation, it's just to connect two clauses in a sentence. Yeah, every time that word appeared, he had a drasha on it, something that he extracted from that word. Kevan shehigia. Once he arrived at the pasuk in Devarim Perek Vav, Es Hashem Elokecha Tira, you should fear Hashem your God. Es Hashem Elokecha Tira, Peresh. So he removed himself, and by removing himself, it means that he saw that there was an inconsistency in his drashot, meaning the drashos only work if it works every time. You can't pick and choose which S's in the Torah fit your model. Either they all fit or none of them fit. So he was paresh, and his students asked him, Amrulo Tamidav, Kol Esen Shadarashta Mati Alem. What's going to be with all the S's all these drashas that you said before? They're all undermined now by the fact that you don't have a drasha for this one. In the same manner that I received reward for my attempt to give a drasha on all of those previous S's, so I will now receive a reward for the fact that I removed myself. That's a deep lesson in and of itself. Sometimes removing oneself is also a sign of humility and also worthy of reward. Ad Shabo Rabbi Akiva, when Rabbi Akiva comes to save the day, V'lomad, and he had a drasha for this S on Es Hashem Elokecha Tira. Just to give the context, this is an S like all the way at the end of the Torah, just a few chapters away from the end of the Torah. So he's darshaning from Bereshis until the end, and he gives up all of those. It's interesting. There's a tshuva of the Maharil, who was one of the late Rishonim of Ashkenaz, and in this tshuva he addressed this drasha, and he says that what's the real meaning of this whole back and forth between Shimon HaAmsoni and Rabbi Akiva. Shimon HaAmsoni also knew that this was the drasha, that this S is alluding to Torah scholars, but he didn't want to say it. Why not? Because he thought it would be received as heretical. People couldn't handle it. What do you mean? Like if you're Torah scholars, like you fear God? Like that's not appropriate. Until Rabbi Akiva, he had so to speak broad enough shoulders that he was willing to give over this teaching. That's what it means, right? I received reward on the drasha on the previous knowledge that I gave over, and I'm also going to have schar on the prisha of refraining because it's knowledge that people can't handle, so to speak. But Rabbi Akiva said, no, people can handle it. You should say it. Yeah. So it's just an interesting side point over here. But what is this idea in Rav Kook's construct of the dynamic of the test, of arriving at the end of a process that seems so far distant from the ideal, and then seeing how it actually reverts back to the ideal in a stronger possible way? The Talmidei Chachamim to God is the same way that is the same relationship, so to speak, as the tav to the thing, the mark to the thing. It's like Chazal uses this metaphor of man being the stamp of God. Like God took a stamp, right? Like there's a divine stamp, and he marked it in the world, and that stamp is man. It's the idea of tselem Elokim, right? The image or the form. There's a divine form to man. So that means that the man is, so to speak, the external expression of the divine reality. That by interacting with man, you're able to get a glimpse of its divine source. Similarly, Talmidei Chachamim, right, true, authentic Torah scholars, a person is able to get a glimpse of authentic Yirah Shamayim through interacting with such people. That's what it means. It's the external. It's the S. It's the tav. It's this external manifestation of the thing. Right, through interacting with that externality, a person is able to get a glimpse of the highest ideal. That's the Es Hashem Elokecha Tira. The other midrash that comes to mind over here when we're talking about this is a very unique midrash in Eicha Rabbah, which I think is very commonly misunderstood. But with this idea, I think it's understood very, very clearly. This is in the Peticha to Eicha Rabbah, the introduction, so to speak, to Eicha Rabbah, and it darshans the pasuk in Eicha. The pasuk says, excuse me, this is a pasuk in Yirmiyahu, "V'osi azavu, v'estorasi lo shamaru." The people, they have abandoned me, and my Torah they have not guarded. That's what it says. Okay, so what's the question on this pasuk? You've all abandoned God, and on top of that, you haven't kept the Torah. Well, if you've abandoned God, then not keeping the Torah is kind of implied, right? Or one could say even more. It's like, if you've abandoned God, then what use is there in keeping the Torah? Just say you've abandoned God. We know, like, they're off the deep end. There's nothing, right? What's this adding? Right? They've abandoned me and they haven't kept my Torah. So it says in the Midrash, Halavai osi azavu b'sorasi shamaru. Halavai, if they had abandoned me, at least they should have kept keeping the Torah. Because through their involvement in the Torah, the light contained within the Torah would have eventually have returned them back to the good. You see this in the past couple of generations. How many times have we seen that there are people that maintained even the most superficial connection to religious observance, to their traditional background, or whatever they want to call it, and that superficial connection was the thing that triggered them back to a more authentic connection to Torah and to relation with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Right? Halavai, they maintain something that eventually that thing will bring them back. This is an example of the most external, superficial. It is superficial. Don't try it. Right? It is really superficial. But even that superficiality is a connection that can jump the person back all the way to the highest ideal. I think we should read a few sections from this from the parish over here. In the second paragraph of the Biur, so Reb David, he expands a little bit on this idea that Rav Kook already alluded to, the idea of the Tav being in allusion to the Sphira of Malchus. So says Rav David, b'derech klal hitachasut hamakubalim letav k'miyatzeg shel hasfira ha'achrona. Typically, the tav is a symbol embodying the last sphira, which is Malchus. Or b'lashon harav, as Rav Kook says, it is the external manifestation of what is going on in the internal divine domain. Ma'aseh ha'adam mitbatim klapei chutz, that the actions of man are expressed externally, ba'olam hachitzoni, in the external world, b'zeh hatav shehem roshmim metavim v'chotmim ba'olam, and that is the tav, that is the roshem that they put in the world, meaning the actions of man is the tav, is the stamp, meaning our actions are putting a stamp, a mark on the world, and that mark harkens back to their original source. Hagdarat hatav, the understanding of the tav as the mark, krishum, Mazkirat hamusag hakabali rishimu. People might be familiar with this mystical term called the rishimu, which is it's like the residue. It's the residue of an experience. The rishimu means that there was a very, very powerful experience. That experience is no longer there, but there's a residual effect of that thing. I don't know if the Rambam would mind if I used him to explain a Kabbalistic idea, but in the introduction to the Moreh Nevuchim, so he gives a very famous mashal where he says it's like a person who's walking along a path in the middle of the night, and it's completely dark, and there's a bolt of lightning, and in that moment he can see the whole expanse, right, is completely illuminated. But then it goes dark a moment afterwards, right? But that one flash of inspiration, so to speak, or illumination, was enough for him to traverse the whole thing. Right? It was enough for him to see the path in front of him for one split second, and that is it. Right. So that's like the rishimu. The rishimu is the experience is no longer here, but the residual effect of that experience is able to carry on. So that's the idea of the tav, in the sense that even though the original experience is no longer there, it leaves behind the roshem. It leaves behind an effect. Hazikaron. It's like the memory. Shenishar ba'olam hachitzoni. It illuminates the world for one moment and then goes back to its source. This idea, by the way, is the idea that is alluded to. Now we're learning Maseches Avos on Shabbos. So in the sixth chapter of Maseches Avos there's a well-known Mishnah that says that every day there's a bat kol that emanates out from Chorev. A bat kol, there's this voice that emanates out from Sinai. So what is a bat kol? What is a bat kol? Literally, bat kol means the daughter of a voice. A daughter of a voice. Meaning, it's not the voice. There was a voice at Sinai. We know there was a voice at Sinai, right? The Kolot to Brakim, it describes it, right, in great detail in the 19th chapter of Sefer Shemos. So there was a big voice at Sinai. So it's not the voice of Sinai. It's the daughter of the voice. It's the after effect of the voice. It's the tav, it's the roshem, it's the residual effect of the voice of Sinai. What's the residual effect of the voice of Sinai? Oy lo labrios me'elbona shel Torah. There's the Torah experiences scorn by the fact that people have abandoned her. That's the bat kol that emanates out from Sinai every day. It's saying, why have you abandoned me? Was given to you as this gift to the world, and you're not paying any attention to me. That's the bat kol. But this idea of the bat kol, it's the idea of the roshem. It's the lingering memory in the collective consciousness of the Jewish people after hearing the voice of Sinai 3,000 years ago. There's this residual effect. It's the tav, and that tav, if it's accessed properly, it can springboard the person back to the aleph, to the original and mikori ideal. Just one note on the idea of the tough oscillating between its soft version and its strong version, because that was a point that Rav Kook brought up. The tough can either be a tough rafa, right, sometimes pronounced s, sometimes pronounced th, or the strong version in the t, right, mashmauta ruchanit. The spiritual significance of this, she'otiot elo mitnadnot, they oscillate back and forth, ba'ofen muvlat bein maleot ledalot merukanot, between a state of fullness or a state of emptiness and poverty. Otiot elo omdot ben ha'olam ha'pnimi le'olam ha'chitzoni. These letters that can sometimes be in a soft form or in a strong form, those letters are beged kefet, right? Bet, gimel, daled, chaf, pei, and taf. Those letters can either be in a soft form or a hard form. Bet, vet, pei, fei, etc. It's alluding to the idea that they can either manifest themselves in a strong, full way or in a poverty-stricken, soft way. The idea being that these letters are dealing with external matters, the tough being the strongest expression of that. The tough is the final externalization of something. So in its state of poverty, it's poor because it's become so distant from the ideal. It's like it bears no resemblance whatsoever to the ideal that I had in mind. But in its strong form is coming back and showing how this actually embodies the ideal in a more powerful way than was originally planned. The Dalet inside the Dalet, right? It's a double Dalet. The tough is a double Dalet, right? The big Dalet on the right and the little Dalet on the left, right? So he brings an interesting fact here that a Dalet and tough numerically share something in common. What that they share in common? Daled is 4 in Gematria, and tough, what's tough in Gematria? 400. Yeah. So the Daled is like the small, constricted version of what Tav is the expanded, fully embodied version. As we said, we'll close with this concept. The Daled in the very beginning of the process is once the process has taken root, so to speak, and there's teutza. There is what's teutza in English? There's momentum. Thank you. There's momentum in the process. So what begins to set in is the constriction and the general sense of constraint that comes along with this world. That's the Dalet, right? There's poverty. But what Rav Kook told us all the way back in Oz Dalet to keep in mind is that very constriction is actually leading the person towards the delet. It's leading the person towards the door. It's leading the person towards the opening that they need to go to. And that was the lesson that we took with us all the way back in Oz Dalet, and we kind of left that on the side, right? It went into the file cabinet, so to speak. And now arriving at the very, very end of the alphabet, where we have the tav, which literally means the externalization of the thing. So we have the Dalet inside the Dalet. We had the constricted Dalet that we learned about in the very beginning of the Aleph Beis, which was the poverty, which was the constricted feeling of having to delve into the world and get your hands dirty and experience that heaviness of the world. But it's the big Dalet in the sense that we now understand that that constriction was leading us to the ideal that was above and beyond anything that could have been imagined at the outset. Ezrat Hashem. Huh?
That we're going to look back and understand how everything got us.
No.
Like non-stop tragedies.
So schok in lashon, so schok is a response to a psychological experience. What's that experience? The experience of things moving in one direction and then taking a 180 in a very sudden way. That's laughter. That's how laughter is produced, right? You lead someone along and you think the story is going in one way and then it's switched and that triggers laughter. So the schok is a reaction to a ma'apech, to a ma'apecha, to something turning around. That's why schok is so associated with Purim. Laughter is so associated with Purim because the theme in Purim is v'nahapochu, right? Everything switched around. So that is embodied in this idea of the tough. The idea of the tough, it seems like the end of a process, but it's actually hearkening back to the very beginning of the process to embody the ideal of the Aleph, which is, it's so lofty that it's unspoken. It can't even be spoken out. Right, and we delved into the Aleph Beis knowing that it's like a lost cause because the ideal, it can't even be said. The Aleph doesn't even make a sound. It can't even be spoken. It's so lofty. But we went in knowing there's no other option. We have to start somewhere. So let's start. So we started going, and then when we get to the tough, we realize that the tough is just springboarding us back to our original ideal that we started off with, being able to embody and manifest and carry it in a more powerful way than we could have imagined. Bezrat Hashem. Excuse me?